This is our straw bale house, and we partnered with the building school Yes Tomorrow from Waitsfield. And Yes Tomorrow had a building design class on the art of timber frame, which is an old, creative way, artisan way of building using no nails. And they had a week-long class, and at the end of that week, they donated the labor of the timber frame to our monastery. And then we decided to make that a straw bale timber frame house. So the walls and the insulation are straw. They're covered over with a plaster, a clay plaster from local clay, and then washed with a clay pigment. This is Sawmill Brook, and it is one of my favorite places on the property. The thing I love about the river is that it just reminds me of continual flow, that all is passing and we really can't cling to anything, and life just keeps moving in a forward motion.
One of the stories about St. Francis of Assisi is when he went out and preached to the birds, and then the birds preached back to him. So I think that really holds the spirit of what we listen for and think about here at the monastery, that it's humankind, of course, but it's also other kind, to really understand that there are other voices that we should be listening to.
We ourselves have been influenced by two men in particular. One was a Jesuit priest by the name of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he was a paleontologist. The other was Thomas Berry, who was a Passionist priest and a cultural historian who studied the world religions and history of the planet, and then went on to study the history of the Earth community itself. But in terms of Catholicism, when we look at the history of Catholicism, we see that there were moments of grace, we could call them, in the history of the tradition from its inception to the present moment. Now we're at the sixth moment of grace, which we call the planetary or the cosmological. And that was ushered in by Thomas Berry and Teilhard de Chardin. Thomas Berry being our mentor. He said there hasn't never been a community founded in the history of the church specifically dedicated to the healing of Earth and its life systems. And we said we will found that one. He passed away a year ago. He was 94. A brilliant, a giant, an intellectual giant.
He had a wonderful and profound courtesy. And he gave the same attention to a person, whether they were a street cleaner or a head of state. They got his full attention. And there aren't many in life that model that for us, and I think he was one of them. Maybe the Dalai Lama, Gandhi, you know, those type of people.
We've been influenced by our mentor, Thomas Berry, who worked closely with a physicist by the name of Brian Swim, and together articulated a book entitled The Universe Story. So they worked with scientists from around the world. So maybe about 98% of scientists from around the world, through empirical evidence, have articulated a story that's 13.7 billion years old. So it's a whole scientific understanding of how we came to be. So from the initial flaring forth or the Big Bang, through the galaxies and the stars, through the supernova explosion that gave birth to our Earth and our solar system, and then Earth history and the life of Earth and how Earth unfolded, and cells and water and life and animals, and then the human community, and then civilization, etc., up to the present moment. So we do root ourselves in a context that is scientific.
I do believe consciously we are evolving and have to evolve. And I think it's this membrane, this noosphere, which is a thought, the thought plane that encircles the world. I think that's more where my mind would go as far as evolution.
We're moving. If we see now that we can't go forward as nation states any longer, because we'll end up killing each other off. It's just not possible to go forward as separate entities on a globe. And rather, we're moving into a new consciousness of the whole. So we would say now we're moving into our planetary phase as a human community. We just came back from the Parliament of the World's Religions, and that's held about every 5 years. And this one was held in Melbourne, Australia. So it was a gathering of all the traditions of the planet. And the theme was hearing each other, healing the earth. What we saw at the Parliament of Religions is that, number one, religions are entering into their cosmological phase or planetary phase across the globe.
All the religions.
Yeah, all the religions. And number two, the dialogue has moved from interreligious to interspiritual. And that means in the past, conversation was at the level of dogma and doctrine, like, what do you believe? This is what I believe. And this is how we talk to each other. But it's transgressed that. It's moved into interspiritual. So when you go into your deep center, in whatever tradition you are, when you go into your meditation practice, your contemplation practice, what's there? What do you find? And what is that impulse directing you to do in the world, in your activism? That's a whole different way of conversing. When Thomas Berry asked to be buried on our land before his death, we reflected on where on this land, what would receive him. And in his book, The Great Work, he wrote a chapter called The Meadow Across the Creek. And in the chapter, he tells the story about when he was a boy of 11, he went behind his house and down a hill, and he crossed a creek. And when he came up from the creek, he entered into a meadow. And he said the meadow was full of white lilies, and the sky was blue with white puffy clouds, and there was the sound of the crickets and the birds. And he was totally taken by that moment. He fell to his knees in prayer and in praise of this great mystery. And he uttered these words, which is, O altitudo sapientiae, which means how great and how deep is the wisdom of God. And he said that meadow experience directed his whole life, as simple as that was. So the meadow became for him an archetype of the earth community. And he would say whatever preserves the meadow is good, and whatever opposes the meadow is not good. And he would say it's that simple. The reason why we buried him in this meadow is because we felt that the meadow, in a sense, took him back in gratitude for his life work on behalf of the meadow.